Campside Media.
Hey, Campside listeners, welcome back to Inside the Tent, our show where we go behind the microphone of our favorite podcasts and talk to the people who brought them to life. I'm Josh Dean, co-founder of Campside and host of some shows you might have heard, but today I'm here to talk to Matthew Angel, a filmmaker, writer, and, important to today's conversation, host of our latest podcast with Sony. It's called Where is Daniel Morcombe? It's an incredible, extremely emotional journey into the story of a missing Australian adolescent that really turned that whole country on its head and led to one of the most incredible police investigations you'll ever hear about. It also features two parents who are truly incredible to behold. If you haven't heard it already, I encourage you to go listen to it as soon as you finish listening to my conversation with Matthew. And if you want more exclusive content or behind-the-scenes anecdotes from our shows, make sure you go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com. Now here's my conversation with Matthew Angel. So, Matt, thanks for doing this. I know this is a story that you've been living with a long time. Can you give us the backstory of how this came to you and why it was so important to you?
Of course. 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago, I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I was listening to one that's kind of an anthology podcast with different crime stories. And my best friend is Australian. He was in the car with me, and he was scrolling through the episodes, and he said, "Oh my gosh, have you listened to episode 54 or whatever it was? The Daniel Morcombe story." And I said, it was my partner and I, Suzanne, were in the car. And I said, no, I haven't gotten to that one yet. He said, "I grew up in the town that Daniel grew up in. We were the same age. He went missing. The story is unbelievable. It's heartbreaking. It's tragic. It's inspirational. His parents, I know because my mother actually wrote a song to help raise money during the search. You have to listen to it." My wife and I listened to it that night, and we couldn't get out of the car. We'd driven home from the office, and we were like, we can't pause this, and we kept listening. And in the end, my jaw was on the floor, because what's incredible about this story is this very rare combination of heartbreak, shock, and inspiration. It's not often you can hear a tragic story about a child who goes missing and ultimately doesn't have a happy ending and somehow walk away feeling inspired. And I give all of that credit to Bruce and Denise Morcombe, Daniel's parents, which people will understand when they hear the podcast. And I immediately said to Lee, "Do you still have contact with the parents?" So we found their emails, reached out to them. Within the week, we were in touch with them. And I have to be honest, why I needed to tell this story, I don't think I could put into words, which is why I think I needed to tell this story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I should have said, I assume a lot of people who listen to this will have heard the podcast, but I should have probably started with just give me the broad strokes of the story.
So on December 7th, 2003, Daniel Morcombe, he was 13 at the time, almost 14, vanished without a trace. And this began what would become a nearly 8-year search for Daniel Morcombe. This took place on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. And basically his parents began this really intense campaign and effort to engage the public in helping find their son and find answers. And simultaneously is this ridiculously massive investigation that's going on in Queensland. And the parents then take on their own kind of investigation behind the scenes, because as they're being contacted by anonymous sources, people from very kind of dark, seedy underbelly communities in this world, Bruce Morcombe and Denise Morcombe can't not follow up on these leads. over time, as they start to feel like the cops aren't doing enough, over time, as things start to kind of come out from the investigation that maybe mistakes are being made, there's definitely this growing tension between these two sides. And the Morcombes appeal to the state coroner of Queensland. Basically, they launch what's called a coroner's inquest. The state coroner has a lot of power to call people to the stand, and basically witnesses, suspects, or persons of interest is what they would call them, put them on the stand and basically make them talk. And what happened is one of the key suspects, a man by the name of Brett Peter Cowan, he was one of 6 people, POIs, to take the stand. And when he left, the cops had this plan in place. And without giving too much away, basically, this elaborate sting operation, and it is how they not only gained a confession from the man who did, in fact, abduct and murder Daniel Morcombe, but how they got him to literally lead them to his own crime scene where they recovered Daniel's remains.
For Australians of a certain age, it's a case that's among the most famous cases of that era, right?
I have never met an Australian of any age that doesn't know the name Daniel Morcombe, because they were parents or grandparents when it happened, because they were then Daniel's age, and now because they take part in curriculum that was started by the Daniel Morcombe Foundation throughout schools all across the nation, and they learn Daniel's story.
Let's talk about the parents for a minute. So earlier you were saying, you know, you had a friend who was able to put you in touch with them. How willing were they to revisit this? Like, what was that process of getting them comfortable with talking about it again?
You know, it was interesting. It was different 7 years ago when I first spoke to them, when I think they were kind of entering the space of potentially revisiting it, potentially exploring an opportunity to get the story out there in a bigger way for all the right reasons, you know? Coming into this podcast all these years later, they were definitely afraid. And I remember we were pretty much a month or 2 out from actually starting this and really going, okay, this is happening. We're doing this with Sony. And we were kind of scheduling, I think in January of this year, like when I was going to be going over to Australia. And once it became real, the conversation that happened with them was very much a different tone. You could feel their anxieties around having to revisit these things, because what I was saying to them is, it's very important for me as the person who's taking on the responsibility of telling this story and wanting to do it respectfully and again, for the right reasons, showing the world not just the side of the parts of the story that say Australian citizens know far and wide, but what are the parts that even the Australian citizens don't know? What are the sides of Bruce and Denise Morcombe that Australians don't know? And so I think once I kind of outlined just how deep I wanted to go with them and what I wanted to cover, it was scary. And there were still things, you know, that people will hear in the podcast they didn't want to talk about. But at the same time, I think there are other things that they talked about. I actually spoke to Bruce and Denise last night to kind of say, here we go. This is happening. It's coming out in, 24 hours. And Bruce asked kind of shyly, did you include that part where I talk about this? And I said, yes. And he was asking about the part where he's the most vulnerable. And he said to me, because I've never actually talked about that to anyone in these kinds of situations. I mean, Bruce and Disney have done hundreds of interviews and talk shows and all this stuff. So that really kind of blew me away. So yeah, there was fear and anxiety, but they tackled this thing head on, and they did go there. And I'm just eternally grateful.
Yeah, they definitely get quite vulnerable at times. Critical of the police, about their own, honest about their own relationship and the struggles their family went through. I would imagine many marriages don't survive something like this. How are they, like, today? like, what is their view on all this? Like, they've obviously built this foundation that's done all this good. Do they seem like they're happily married in a good place, like
They're
more solid than ever?
they're they're very funny about that. When you talk to them about this kind of stuff, Denise will be like, well, we're together, aren't we? Like, they're very cheeky about their relationship. Denise actually
as
said
Aussies
to me
always are.
Yeah, exactly. They're very Aussie about it, is the way I would say. Good at deflecting with humor when it comes to getting touchy about the relationship. I mean, I dug deep. I went back to, I think the first question I asked in this whole process was sitting with Bruce and Denise Morcombe and saying, "Take me back to the day you met." But Bruce was red as a tomato, whether they're stronger than ever, what I do know is, I hope so. What I do know is they have come so far. When you ask them the question about, did you play the what if games? What if we had just done this differently? What if you hadn't done this? What if we hadn't moved here? And, Denise was very honest about the fact that, yes, constantly. But at the same time, they've come to an incredibly strong understanding that this happened and they used their pain for good. Bruce Morcombe will always say, we used our pain for good. And when they speak to people nowadays and they go to schools and stuff, they just tell people, whether you're a victim of crimes like any crime against children, they say they encourage people to use their pain to make a difference. So they have a very good understanding of that. And it really kind of blows me away because I feel like, well, I don't know that I could do it. I don't think I ever could. I don't think I could go through what they went through personally and carry that strength. That would be very, 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 very difficult.
No, and you're a parent now. I'm a parent. I'm sure there are a lot of parents out there who just sort of reflexively turn away from stories like this. And I hope, I can imagine, and it's totally fair. People are like, I just can't go there. I don't want to hear the story of a missing, murdered child. But I hope those people give the show a chance because it is uncomfortable at times. Although, I would say mostly not uncomfortable. It's not like we dwell in the darkness and there are some dark moments, but for the most part, it's a fairly inspiring story. It starts with this terrible thing that makes all of us uncomfortable, but it goes in places that I think you'll find you are happy you tuned in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would encourage anyone who's listening to this that hasn't listened to the show to give it a shot, because in the end, I think that the takeaway is the difference that these two wonderful humans have made. It's pretty astounding. This is important stuff for people to talk about more and to understand, because it's the suffering and silence that so many people experience as victims of crimes like this, especially as children, that make it so much more traumatic, that magnify that trauma. Not to say it's not traumatic, my God, it's traumatic no matter what, but there's a reason they say don't suffer in silence, right? We can hopefully encourage people to come forward and to talk and to make this more of a conversation, because it does make a difference.
And Bruce and Denise really leaned into that. In fact, like, they easily could have just sat home and been sad and fallen apart, but I mean, Bruce was out there literally putting signs on the road, and they became, I mean, vigilante is the wrong word, but like,
I have always referred to what Bruce and Denise did as like they were their own, that they were vigilantes, because look, at a certain point you had the cops saying to them, knock it off. What you're doing is withholding evidence. You had that pushback from law enforcement, and they basically said, no fucking way. Right. They were like, this is our son. We won't back off. They are vigilantes. When you're going out at all hours of the night and sitting down in homes of strangers, people that have just gotten out of prison, were part of pedophile rings and stuff like that, because they're desperately searching for any answers and will go to any lengths. And you start carrying secret recording devices and lead pipes and, whatever it is, like that is what that part of the story feels like to me.
It's not like for all those years they were thinking like, oh, there's a chance he's alive. Like they decided pretty early that they weren't going to find him, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every time you talk about that, they knew, but they held on to that small piece. And I think it got smaller and smaller and smaller. But I think as a parent, you can't help but hope.
But even when I think they, let's say, lost that hope or gave up because maybe it was easier to start grieving and then focus that on something positive, which is like trying to find the person responsible. But also I think it was probably as much about just wanting to know what happened, right? It's not just about catching the person who did it. And of course that was the primary motive. But I think also in that situation, you just want to know what happened, right? Because not knowing is its own torture.
100%. There's even to this day, you kind of have to take what the man responsible says he did and how things went down. It's the only version of events they know. But if you ask the Morcombes, if you ask the police involved, every single person I talk to about it, no one believes that this man told the full truth. And I actually asked them, this isn't in the podcast, but I asked Bruce, I said, if I put a piece of paper in front of you right now and it had the truth on it, would you look? And he said no. And then he quickly went, yeah, I would look. And the reason was because the not knowing is still the hardest part for them. So I think the not knowing that they went through for all those years was unbearable. And there's still a little bit of that not knowing that I think they wrestle with in silence. I hope that, the podcast makes them proud and that they never feel that anything is ever sensationalized or that anything was ever taken advantage of. It was why it was very important to me that early on in episode 1, whether it be the end of episode 1, what have you, we make clear in whatever way we do that this is not a question of, does this boy survive? Because that to me felt like we were sensationalizing something. That's not the point here. But yeah, I think from Bruce, Bruce's own words, he shows a side of himself in this podcast that he's never shown the world.
And obviously part of their motivation for doing it is this foundation that they've built that's now has an incredible impact and legacy. Could you explain a little bit about what their intention was and how big it is today?
Absolutely. The Daniel Morcombe Foundation is its intention, I think, has always been threefold, and that has shifted over time. Initially it definitely had a very strategic kind of approach, which was, how do we keep Daniel's name in the headlines and simultaneously help people that are victims of sexual crimes against children, and also try and make sure this never happens to another child again. How do we teach children safety, public safety, to be more aware of their environments and to ask for help when they feel like they're in danger? So there were always those multiple different kind of goals. I think, of course, after Daniel was found and they had answers and they could lay him to rest, they said they weren't done. Listeners will hear in episode 8 that they are at the most unbelievable time in their lives still out there doing this work and going on these massive school tours up the coast. And that has continued to this day. And I think it's safe to say that their intention behind the foundation shifted drastically into a full bore focus on helping people and keeping children safe, with no strategy behind it, because that mission had been accomplished. They could have easily packed up their bags and said, okay, we did it. We found the answers regarding our son, and hopefully we helped some people along the way. But here they are today. The foundation is 20 years young, and they're still helping people around the nation, and it's massive. The Daniel Morcombe Foundation is massive. They have curriculum in schools across the nation that they developed hand in hand with the Department of Education. The last Friday of every October is what they call Day for Daniel. It's nationally recognized. And this is a day where in schools, basically, it's a day to wear red in honor of Daniel and to learn as much as, to focus on that curriculum and to focus on teaching children safety. And it's just massive. I had the opportunity to go to one of their big annual events. I've heard all about it. You can hear me talk about it. You can hear the audio. You can read about it. You don't really get it until you're sitting there and you feel like you're at the freaking Golden Globes and you're like, this is for the Daniel Morcombe Foundation. It's really wild.
Yeah, it's incredible what they've built. And hopefully with this show, some of that, ripples out into the U.S. and Canada and other places. People will now hear this story. We're about out of time, but I wanted to say, you've been living with this for 7 years. People are going to hear your voice, but I feel like we should give some credit to the other people who made this with you, especially Joe and Garrett.
Oh my God. Joe Barrett is, I'm speechless.
He's the producer, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. He's a producer and co-writer. We wrote this together every step of the way. He was my guiding light through this process, which was a very new medium for me to explore. I've never met someone who works harder for all of the right reasons, being just passion and respect for good journalism. He is phenomenal. And our sound designer and I like to say sound designer and composer, Garrett Tiedemann. This is a guy who we had one meeting before he began, and I basically pitched him my vision for what I wanted this to be. And he did it in the most unbelievable way. He blew me away. He far exceeded any expectations I ever could have had of what this could feel like. So yes, them as well as Campside, Josh Dean, I appreciate your belief in this story from the beginning. Our partners at Pacesetter, who saw the potential in this and said, let's do it. So I'm just eternally grateful to everyone. This has been, and I told the Morcombes this last night, the single-handedly most fulfilling experience of my professional career. So I'm and I mean it. I don't say that lightly. I've never told anyone that about a project. So I'm filled with gratitude.
Well, that's very nice to hear. It's a great show. You guys collectively did great work. And anyone listening to this who hasn't listened yet should go immediately. And you will not regret it, I promise. So thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much, Josh.
Thanks so much to Matthew and the rest of the Where is Daniel Morcombe team, and thank you for listening to Inside the Tent. If you haven't already, don't forget to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.